The world is about to become more divided than it's been in quite some time. And the question that's going to come for us all is, which side are you on? Left or right? Nationalist or globalist? America or China? Everyone wants to know where you stand, and they'll judge you the moment you answer. But here's the thing, these are false binaries. You don't have to answer. And the real choice is something else entirely. It's whether you can keep your mind your own, while everyone around you loses theirs. This is World Astrology Report. I'm your host, Dan Waits, and welcome to another journey into the past to understand the present and the future. There are two core reasons that I'm saying this is an era of splits and bifurcations, and both of them have to do with the sign of Gemini. All three of the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, are expressing themselves through the Gemini archetype, the sign of the twins, right now. Uranus is in Gemini. It started its transition into Gemini with its first ingress in July 2025. It made its second and final ingress in April of this year, and it won't start transitioning out of Gemini until 2032, so we have a good 7 years of this transit to go. Uranus represents illumination, awakening, and the impulse to go one's own way. By transit, it brings new ideas into the world that relate to the themes of the signs it's in. It inspires geniuses and pioneers who do things for the first time under its influence. In Gemini, we can expect to see the emergence of significant new ideas and inventions related to communication, transport, exchange, and even our models of reality. But here, I want to focus on one particular aspect of the Gemini archetype: its duality, its two-ness. All of the mutable signs in the zodiac have a duality to them, since they're said to represent times when two seasons are expressing themselves at once. But as the sign of the twins, Gemini carries that sense of doubleness or two-ness most strongly. And what you'll tend to see when Gemini is activated are splits and bifurcations and multiplicities, since multiplicity is the result of repeated divisions into two. Gemini is about holding more than one model of reality or way of being in mind or spirit at the same time. It's a sign of bisexuality, hermaphrodites, wearing two hats, or being two-faced. Gemini, of all the signs, is not afraid to contradict itself. Indeed, Gemini would say that if you're not contradicting yourself sometimes, you're not thinking, you're preaching. The Sun in Gemini poet Walt Whitman once wrote, "Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes." You may be able to understand this double nature of Gemini by looking at your own natal chart. Very often, you'll find a split or a bifurcation in the whole sign house that it occupies. People with a Gemini 10th house often have two jobs or roles in life. Someone with a Gemini 4th house might have two homes or nationalities or even families. Gemini as the 11th house can bring two friendship groups, and so on. And now we have Uranus, the awakener, in Gemini. Uranus disrupts the status quo or wakes you up in ways that ultimately bring you closer to the person you're meant to be. Uranus's transit through Gemini may bring a split to the area of your life represented by the Gemini house. It may awaken you to another side of yourself. It might open you up to a new way of doing things which you'll explore while retaining an earlier mode of action. In other words, it will bring a bifurcation. Incidentally, I have some consultation slots available now, so if you'd like me to look at your chart and what Uranus in Gemini might mean for you, then hit me up at my website. But Uranus is one of the transpersonal planets. It works at the collective level too. Last time Uranus was in Gemini, from 1941 to 1949, the world fought the Second World War. The result was the division of the planet into two great camps in the Cold War, which pit the capitalist USA against the communist USSR. But to understand more about why that happened, we have to think about the other powerful outer planets, Pluto and Neptune. If you're enjoying this video so far, please do me a favor and click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and even activate notifications. All that stuff really helps the channel, and I appreciate it. Also, a quick announcement about the next monthly World Astrology Report live stream. In the last stream, Apocalypse 2040, we looked at predictions of a coming apocalypse or end of the world. Next, we're going to look at the other side of that coin, namely the idea that we're about to enter a new age or a golden age. Does astrology support that? And can it explain why our culture is so obsessed with this question? This is going to be a two-part stream. The first will be free for everyone on YouTube, The second will be exclusive for members of my website, members here on YouTube at correspondent tier, or you can purchase entry on the live streams page at www.worldastrologyreport.com. All right, back to the video. Right now, we have a remarkable outer planet configuration in the sky, a minor grand trine of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Uranus and Pluto are in a harmonious trine with Neptune at the midpoint, making sextiles with the other two planets. For me, the most interesting segment of this configuration is the sextile between Neptune and Pluto, which goes exact on July the 25th. I see this as a Neptune-Pluto sextile with an assist from Uranus. The outermost planets, Pluto and Neptune, provide the base notes. Now, to understand what Pluto and Neptune are doing here, we need to go back in time. The start of their current cycle, when they made their last conjunctions, takes us back to the 1890s. You can find almost every facet of the modern world expressing itself in embryonic form in the last 20 years of the 19th century. That's because in 1891 and 1892, Pluto and Neptune formed 3 conjunctions at 8 and 7 degrees of Gemini. They conjoin every 493 years or so, creeping forward through the zodiac a few degrees every time. This chart shows all their conjunctions going back to around the time when the Great Pyramid was built. Now, 1891 and 1892 were the second time we saw a set of conjunctions in Gemini. The first was in 1398 and 1399, which marked a great shift from a world ruled primarily by kings, landowners, and priests to one dominated by bankers, traders, and their new priest-class scientists. Soon after those conjunctions, around 1450, Johannes Gutenberg invented his printing press, and so a long information age that we're still living through now began then. And that's very fitting. Gemini is the sign of communication, ruled by the messenger, Mercury. It's very curious. It's about expanding knowledge. And it's about exchange. That's where the bankers and merchants come in. But as we've seen, Gemini produces splits and bifurcations. At the time of those first Gemini conjunctions in 1398 and 1399, the Catholic Church was split. There was a pope in Rome and one in Avignon. And that foreshadowed an even greater split still to come, the emergence of the Protestant faiths in the Reformation, kickstarted by Martin Luther in 1517 during the long sextile of Pluto and Neptune. At the end of that long waxing sextile, Europe fragmented into states professing Protestantism and Catholicism, and it resulted ultimately in terrible religious wars. But again, back in 1398, the year of those Gemini conjunctions, it's believed by renegade scholars like Joseph Farrell that the Knights Templar connected Scottish nobleman Henry Sinclair made a secret voyage to the New World, confirming suppressed information that the Templars had gathered during the Crusades. The voyage foreshadowed Christopher Columbus's later voyage there in 1492. That's what happens at conjunctions. We see seedings, we see foreshadowings. The result of all this was that the world bifurcated again. At least in the minds of Europeans, there was now an old world and a new world. And yet another important bifurcation emerged during that same Pluto-Neptune cycle, one that's still with us to this day. In 1789 came the storming of the Bastille and the start of the French Revolution. At that time, Pluto and Neptune were in a trine aspect with Pluto in Aquarius, as it is today. But again, the planets continued in part to serve the agenda of the sign they originally conjoined in, Gemini, the sign of the twins, and they brought a big bifurcation. The revolutionaries established a national assembly. Those who were in favor of retaining the power of the monarchy, in other words, the traditionalists, sat on the right of the speaker. Those who wanted to abolish the old institutions sat on the left. This was the birth of the idea of left and right, conservative and progressive, which has been retained to this day as the primary frame through which many people think about politics. You can boil it down to the question, do you want to put your foot on the accelerator of social change or apply the brakes? Of course, that question only exists within a certain frame, a frame that suggests history progresses in linear fashion and that society must be continually reformed to bring it closer to perfection. The frame itself sets the terms of debate and circumscribes the conclusions you're allowed to come to, but I digress. Let's move forward to our current cycle, the one that began in the 1890s. Another crucial bifurcation emerged at that time because then an electricity-powered virtual world started to emerge, one that would increasingly rival the real world as the focus of our attentions. Think here of the inventions of that time, of things like radio and cinema. And a proto-internet was even constructed then, the British All-Red Line, a global telegraph network. So the Earth was being wired with a kind of nervous system, one that's reaching a pivotal new stage of development right now. But you can also see other divisions emerging at that time. The corporate trust had emerged as a dominant structure in the economic world. The trust was essentially the multinational conglomerate in embryonic form. In 1890, the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed in the US to try to rein the trusts in. The fight to restrain corporate power is built into the fabric of this big Pluto-Neptune cycle, in my opinion. And within socialist circles, there was debate about whether socialism should be constructed by revolutionary means or by gradual reform of liberal democracy. A very influential organization advocating the gradualist approach, the Fabian Society, the wolves in sheep's clothing, was set up around this time. In Germany, Otto von Bismarck introduced the world's first welfare state, not because he was a socialist, but as a bulwark against socialist revolution. Later capitalist democracies of the 20th century, the world over, did the same thing, launching welfare states for the same reason, to hold back the communists. And so in the 1890s, we saw the emergence of the modern managerial state and its two key formulations, statist liberal democracy and communism. In other words, the seeds of the Cold War were being sown. Let's get more technical and empirical. In the late 1940s, Pluto and Neptune start to move into orb of their first major aspect, the sextile. They do an interesting thing in their 493-year cycle, which is that they stay in their waxing sextile for almost a century. When they first come into orb, a process of societal mutation begins. At the end, perhaps 80 to 90 years later, that process culminates. This is a chart showing the tightness of the Pluto-Neptune sextile over the past 100 years or so. This period almost perfectly matches up with the Cold War, a time when the world was indeed split into two great camps. It's a massive bifurcation, confirming our Gemini cycle thesis, both in theme and timing. You could broadly say that the world was divided into left and right camps, and that these divisions also existed within the societies of the West and many others too. When Pluto and Neptune started to move out of sextile in the late 80s, the Cold War ended, the bifurcation dissolved, and we entered the unipolar period. Now we're back in a period where they're making exact sextiles. And once again, there's a second Cold War underway, this time between the US and China. So the world is bifurcated once again, but that's not the only split. And the others are within our societies and getting deeper. In this recent live stream, I discussed Andre Barbeau's ideas about the minor grand trine of 2026, the astrology we're experiencing right now. One thing I think Barbeau may have underestimated, at least in the quotes about 2026 of his that everyone shares, is how divided the world would feel at this time. We're seeing a second Cold War, but within societies, particularly in the West, people are ideologically split. People are for immigration or against it. People are for AI or dead against it. People are for Donald Trump or Zoran Mandani. Political polarization is as bad as it's ever been, if not worse. You're expected to sit in one camp or the other. You have to choose. But I suspect there are quite a lot of people watching this channel who try to transcend that kind of binary thinking. That's certainly where I've landed. You might have had an experience like the following. You're with someone you don't know that well, or perhaps an old friend you haven't seen for a while, and you make a comment about politics. Let's say you criticize something that Trump did, or perhaps you say that something he did worked well. And that defines the moment, because based on that one opinion, that person has decided you must be in a particular political camp, and they've judged you accordingly. We're all expected to identify with one political tendency or another. But here's the thing. The real power brokers themselves transcend this binary. And I think real power lies with corporations and banks and those who control them. These are institutions in the business of moving money around and collecting intelligence on the world to make profitable decisions. And guess what? They fund both sides of the political spectrum. They make money selling weapons to both sides in the wars. And here we need to consider another idea from the Gemini age, the dialectic, which is commonly represented by the formula thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It's often attributed to the German idealist philosopher Hegel, as well as to Marx with his version of history, dialectical materialism. I think that the money power runs the world through what we could call dialectical governance, the style of rule that involves exploiting binaries and polarization in order to ensure that favored policies are implemented. For example, there are third rail policies that neither side criticizes or dares mention. Those sides back unrestrained financialized capitalism, a certain attack dog colonialist enterprise in the Middle East, and generally whatever wars the military-industrial complex wants. Oh, and the AI-powered surveillance state. What's more, there are certain things that only one side can do, but both sides ultimately want. For example, Barack Obama campaigned on the promise of hope and a break with George W. Bush's unpopular regime. But in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, he empowered all the guys who were in charge of the institutions and regulators that let it happen. Then he continued Bush's war on terror and launched disastrous regime change operations in Libya and Syria. Similarly, Trump ran on an anti-war ticket, which pleases MAGA supporters, and he launches the war in Iran in violation of his previous promises not to. What's more, many of his supporters are suspicious of big government and fearful of looming totalitarianism. But Trump is the one who's rolling out the digital control grid. It was almost the first thing he did after getting elected, launching Project Stargate, the $500 billion AI infrastructure project. RFK Jr., supposedly a fighter against technocracy, has said he wants every American wearing a digital health tracker within 4 years. That data has to go somewhere, and my guess is into the maws of the AI superstructure. But here's where this gets relevant to where we are now. If I'm right about the astrology of the moment, then splits and bifurcations should intensify in the coming years. As we've seen, Uranus is in Gemini until its transition out begins in 2032, and Pluto and Neptune are making sextiles until 2032 as well, and they also have a Gemini agenda in part. I suspect that's going to mean that we're all put under more and more pressure to take sides. Efforts are going to be made to sweep us up into great camps and pit us against each other. And among the tools used for that will be AI. Let's talk about AI. I don't mind admitting that I've been using it quite a bit recently. I almost never use it to write because I want to keep my voice and my ability to use my brain. But I can see benefits to it as a research tool and for doing certain boring things I don't think are worth my time anyway. At the same time, I also realize that AI is pretty dangerous. It has the obvious and very strong potential to make us lazier and stupider. It demands a degree of consciousness if you're going to use it. What's more, something I've noticed is how it's constantly trying to steer me towards certain establishment conclusions and ways of thinking. This may be because it's aggregating human opinion, and so it favors what it thinks is the established consensus. But there's more to it than that, because AI companies have a strong hand in literally telling AI what to tell us. Anthropic, for example, runs what it calls constitutional AI, whereby the model critiques and revises its outputs against a set of principles or values laid out by the company. And then there are things called system prompts. These are essentially invisible prompts given to the AI by the company at the start of each conversation you have with it that give it a bunch of principles to follow, or rules if you like. As a very obvious example, a few years ago it was clear that Google's AI was under direct instructions to insert diversity into all of its pictures, and so you saw it generating ahistorical absurdities like black Nazis and founding fathers and stuff like that. Given the history of intelligence agencies funding and infiltrating the media and Hollywood, it wouldn't surprise me one bit to learn that they're leaning on the AI companies and trying to influence the editorial line that the AI takes. In my own work, I've started to notice that Claude's AI is constantly guiding me towards establishment judgments on certain issues. If I bring up the work of any kind of heterodox thinker or researcher, it will usually insert critiques of their thinking without me even asking. The only stuff it seems satisfied with is the kind of milquetoast thinking that wouldn't trouble Wikipedia or a mainstream newspaper. And it hates conspiracies and tries to guide me towards thinking that things just happen because the world's chaotic and people like to ascribe intentionality where it doesn't exist and blah, blah, blah. And yet there are conspiracies. The Epstein files confirmed a number of them, but I don't see Claude revising its priors in line with that. Of course, if I spot problems with its assumptions, it immediately apologizes wholeheartedly and reorients itself. But it always moves back towards those establishment mainstream positions. And so it's becoming very clear to me how powerful AI will be for shaping people's thought patterns, especially when people use it for almost all their thinking and decision making. This may not seem really pressing right now, but just wait until the next major current thing news spectacular is rolled out. Just wait until the next war needs justification. The AIs will rigidly enforce the orthodoxy, I am certain of it. AI is kind of a new Bible divinatory tool and encyclopedia rolled into one. It's the holy grail of mind control. Of course, a lot of people are saying, well, don't use AI then. And if you want to do that, well, that's up to you. And I think it's a perfectly reasonable response. But it's not going to be for everyone. I tend to think that these technologies have their uses. You just have to stay on top of them. And here I want to talk about Rudolf Steiner's perspective on our era, because in many of his lectures, you can see that he precisely anticipated the world that we're living in now. He attributed this kind of information technology to the work of an oppositional being that he called Ahriman. Ahriman wants to make us believe the illusion that the world is purely material and that there are no spiritual dimensions to reality. Steiner thought Ahriman would incarnate in the world around this time. Actually, he thought Ahriman would incarnate as an actual human being. But even if you don't take Steiner literally on that point, I still think his ideas have something to teach us. In particular, he said that nothing could be done to prevent Ahriman's incarnation. What was important is that we meet his incarnation consciously. If we do that, we can actually learn valuable things from the episode. I think we can apply this perspective to our engagement with information technology in general and AI in particular. If you're going to use it, just do it very carefully and consciously. Or go live in the forest now. Perhaps more of us will join you later. It seems to me that there's a hardening right now into camps, pro-AI and anti-AI. And I say resist the temptation to identify with camps in general. These are just more false binaries. But there is one binary that I think is worth taking seriously. There is one choice to be made. I think it's the choice between human freedom and being subsumed by the collective. We've seen hints in recent years of what it really means to lose sovereignty and to be forced to surrender it according to the diktats of the managerial state and its corporate allies. People like Hannah Arendt and Alexander Solzhenitsyn warned us about totalitarianism in the 20th century. And we've seen a number of failed examples of it already in this Pluto-Neptune cycle. It seems to me that we're at risk of seeing more. So the real fight is the fight for sovereignty. And I think there's a genuinely interesting parallel between where we find ourselves now and the last time Neptune moved through Aries from 1861 to 1875. It all has to do with the theme of the sovereignty of the individual. In the bonus section of this video, available for members of the channel, whether here on YouTube or at my website, we explore those themes. Thanks for watching and see you again on the channel very soon.